can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, I'll talk really loud. Thank you to the rest of the board who was here tonight, because I'm sure I'm going to make a lot of mistakes, and they're gonna correct me when I get it wrong. So, how many of you read your sales agreement when you bought your condo? And not just the 350 pages, but the EPA version, which was another 600 pages. It was only a link. Okay, we have one person. That's very good. So I'll tell you, I tried to read that document, and it was so boring and so repetitive and contradicts itself in various places. And if you don't have any context when you're trying to read stuff about the governance of this building, for example, it's garbage. It's impossible to make sense of. We actually ended up hiring a lawyer and saying, here's our 1,000-page document. Tell us if we should buy this place or not. How much risk are we taking? It was absolutely crazy. And even after we got here and I figured out that I better learn how some of the governance works around here, it was still really hard. And when I finally thought I was starting to figure it out, and talking to other people like Sandy, like Jan, like Jane on the board, I thought, I'm sure no one understands how this thing works other than 4 or 5 people, and maybe just a short training would be helpful to people to understand how governance works. And so that's all this is. It's a short presentation. It tries to, at a very, very superficial level, we'll cover just a few of the governance concepts for this building. And by governance, that word gets used a lot in a lot of different meanings. For governance here, I just mean, how do we make decisions as a community? And I'll talk about on the first slide, because one of the most important things to remember is that the Rainier Building Residential Unit Owners are an association. So the association is all of us here in the room. It's not the board of directors. It's not any one person anywhere. How this building operates and runs, it's all of us here. We are an association of owners. So that's a very important first concept, because when we talk later about what the board does, what the different associations do, and we'll get into their multiple associations, people often say, well, I wish we were doing something different. I don't like this policy. Why don't we do something different over here? Remember, you're all part of the association. So you all have a voice in governance, but you have to be willing to exercise that voice. And that's important to use that voice, and I'll talk about that in some later slides as well. So the Rainier Association, it's all of us. We do have a board, because all of us can't get together every month and look at the financials and decide whether or not the accounts are being represented correctly. We can't all get together and look at whether or not landscapers are doing their job, talk about whether the windows should be washed this month or next month. You need to have a smaller group of people do that. So we have a document that establishes the association, and it also establishes the fact that the association will have a board to help make decisions on behalf of the association. And the board of directors for the residential board, and I'm going to try and be very clear, because we have multiple different associations in this building. Actually, I shouldn't say multiple. We have 2, but we'll get to that in a second. So I'm going to try and be consistent about which one I'm talking about. Here I'm talking about the residential board. So that's the board of directors for the Residential Homeowners Association. So for all of us here in the room. It includes 5 different positions. So there's a president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, and an at-large member. If you're a member of the board, you don't run for the board for one of those positions. The officer positions, as they're called, the president, vice president, etc. On an annual basis, the board gets together and elects people into those positions. So if you join the board, you're just joining the board, and at some point it'll be determined which one of the positions that you're going to hold. And also here at the Rainier Association, we have some committees. I listed the committees here. They're not formal committees. They're not established in our governance documents. They don't have formal charters. There's no formal mechanism for reporting back and forth to the board. So they're a little ad hoc, but they nonetheless do have a relationship with the board, and there is a board member who is a liaison for each of those committees. So the committees are another opportunity for anyone who's in the association who would like to be involved in the building and what goes on here to get involved by joining one of the committees. So, last point on this page, and we'll get to this in a little bit more detail, how the association works and how the board works. We don't just make that up as we go as an association, it's spelled out in documents. There's some governing documents that were written by the developer of this building, who is also the developer for the entire Point Wrestling community. And those documents are filed with the county, and those documents, there's a declaration, and it's a declaration establishing the condominium and the condominium association. And there's bylaws and there's rules and regulations. So those are documents, formal documents that are filed with the county that specify how this organization works, both the association and the board of directors. We also have Washington state law that's relevant. There's a Washington code that is specific to homeowners associations and to condominium associations as a subsection, and those also govern how the board operates and how the association operates. So there's lots of different documents and rules that prescribe how the association and the board work. So this is where it starts to get confusing, and if you're trying to read the documents where you probably stopped reading. So there's actually two different associations that are part of the Rainier building. And that's the way it was set up by the builder at the beginning. And what we have is above the residential association, we have a building master association. And that master association also has a board of directors. So our board of directors is actually underneath of that master board of directors, and I'll talk about the relationship between the two in just a second. In the documents, it uses very confusing language when it talks about the master association, the master board. It's made up of, whereas our residential association is made up of all of us owners of 200 units in this building, the master association is made up of 3 units. One unit is the building, and the document's kind of hard to interpret because the building didn't exist when they filed the document, and so they said the master association, the building is the airspace that's basically the property lines, and anything that might be built on that lot in the future. So that's unit 1. Unit 1 is basically the shell of the building, landscaping, the paved areas around it. That's one of this building. It has a separate owner. We don't own any of that. We have entitlements to use it. We have somewhat partial ownership, which our lawyer has explained to us is very confusing, whether we have rights to use it or we have property rights, but we'll get into that a little bit later as well. So that's one owner and one element of the master association. The second element is the parking garage. That one's pretty easy and pretty boring. You all know where the parking garage is. That has an owner, and they also have a seat on the master board of directors. And then the last seat on the board of directors is us, the residential association. And we are represented on that master board by a member of the residential board of directors, and the residential board elects one of the members of the residential board to serve on the master board to represent the association. Now, there are a couple quirks about the way this structure works. One, there are 3 different members of the board there. That means when they vote, there are 3 people voting. 2 of the people that vote really don't have a lot to do with this building. Their ownership stake is pretty minimal. We get 1 vote. So a lot of the stuff that affects this building and decisions that get made, talk about governance as being about how do you make decisions, we only have 1/3 voice in as an association. A lot of the big decisions that affect the community or the building, all of us, happen at the master board, and we have a very minor, I shouldn't say very minor, 1/3. It's a relatively small role. Unfortunately, associated with that, though, we pay all of the bills. And all of them is a little bit of an overstatement. The Master Association pays 0.3% of the overall cost. All the other costs that go to the Master Association, they have lots of costs, and we'll get to some of the things they're responsible for. They just charge us for that. So the Master Association, they have costs associated with owning the building, with maintenance of the building, but that all flows down still to the residential association, except for a very small portion that the master is responsible for. So that's the confusing, overarching governance structure that we have, made up of 2 associations. They each have a board. We have a residential association, and as a residential association, we have 1 out of 3 votes on that master association. Question in front, I should have said at the beginning, if you have any questions, don't wait till the end, just ask them, because I don't know about all of you, but I forget my question by the end if I try to leave. Go ahead.
Between the parking spaces and our balconies and a lot of other stuff, there's a lot of limited common property in this building. Which unit does that fall under?
Yeah, that also is confusing, and maybe some of my fellow board members will jump in and help me out here. But there are common elements that are defined in these declarations in both the Master Association and the Residential Association. And those common elements include things that all of us have a right to use. The hallways are a common element. This room is a common element. The lobby is a common element. There are then limited common elements. So those, the common elements, they're not owned by us. They're owned by the Unit 1.
All right.
Unit 1 owns those elements. Now, an important thing to remember is we're responsible for some aspects of that. They own them. We're responsible for the maintenance. We have to do the cleaning of the hallways. We do the vacuuming, the scrubbing of the carpets on floors 1 through 4. So a lot of those common elements, although we don't own them individually or as a community, we nonetheless have the responsibility to bear the cost of the maintenance and upkeep.
Who is Unit 1? Who is Unit 1?
Unit 1, the owner was originally Cohen, the developer for the community, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'll use all the wrong words here. He went into bankruptcy, it went into receivership. Currently, it's Silver Cloud, the company that owns Silver Cloud, the hotel, is representing what is called the declarant, and that was Cohen. And Sandy is now going to correct me.
No, you're partially right.
I was close, good.
Yeah, very close. So when we began to move into the building, I had a lot of experience, because I also own a condo in Century. So we believe that Cohen or RPS was the declarant for this building. So when we moved away from RPS and chose to go with a different management company, a lot of things came out of the dirt for both Rainier and Baker, which identified that all along the developer was hired by Silver Cloud, who is the true declarant of both Baker and Rainier.
So where are Baker and Century and all the, where's everybody else in the apartments on this?
So I can tell you, so Century was bought by a company called CWS. Copperline was bought by a company called CWS, and Baker and Rainier are still under the governance at a very large majority by Silver Cloud, which we were not even aware of until, and in fact, the residential boards of each of these 4 condominiums is the reason that we have a receiver in place, because we saw the antics that were going on. So, yeah.
Interesting.
What's the mission of the Master Association Board?
That is a great question. Another question that I've been asked about myself is, why do they want to be the owner of a unit that doesn't give them anything other than the rights to go through the front door, and they can come into this room and use it if they wanted, and they've got a few parking spots. But everything that they do, just like everything we do, is prescribed in those documents. They have their own declaration, their own bylaws, their own rules and regulations that govern what they do and what they're responsible for. And I've got that listed on a future page.
So also important to note is the highest governance over our entire community is called the PROA, the Point Ruston Owner Association. The highest cost within our master budget is paid to PROA, and it's paid from the master. So depending upon which building and how the legal documents were set up, Silver Cloud potentially, by maintaining the master presence here at Rainier, which we hope doesn't last forever, and in Baker, may give them potential to have a stronger vote in when the PROA board is put together. So it's very beneficial for them to own more votes within a residential organization.
We had a slide on the PROA, that's the Point Ruston Owners Association. I took it out because it just adds a third layer that makes it all even more confusing. That association would have all of the buildings listed underneath of it and all of the other elements of the community. So the hotel is underneath of that. They're responsible for everything. We're responsible for hallways. The master is responsible for the building. The PROA gets the roads and sidewalks and everything else throughout the community.
All right, so you covered common areas are under Unit 1. Does that mean limited common
Yes.
properties under Unit 2?
No, limited common elements are split between the two. So let's talk about what a limited common element is. So common elements would be elements that all of us have an entitlement to use together, like this room. Your balcony on your own unit is a limited common element. You don't own it, but contractually, you have the sole right to the use of it. Your neighbor can't just climb over from their balcony onto yours and say, hey, I decided to use your balcony today. It's for your exclusive use. You don't own it, but it is a limited common element, meaning it's limited in its usage and it's limited to you. Your parking space is also a limited common element. So there is limited common elements that are part of the garage and part of Unit 1. And if you were here at the last board meeting when Jeremy Stilwell, our attorney, was here, he was saying he thinks the documents are actually not completely clear, and under Washington law, maybe you have some property ownership rights and limited common elements, but that's an issue for another conversation another day.
Are the elevators owned by Unit 1?
I'm sorry?
Are the elevators owned, is that a part of the common?
Yes, they are.
Richard?
I had a question first. Go ahead, Sue.
Oh, no, I was pointing at Stephen.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
This is the Rainier Building. How does the Baker Building fit into this whole thing?
The Baker Building has their own set of documents of their own structure, just like we do. And they would be under what Sandy was explaining as the PROA, which is an umbrella owners association for the entire Point Ruston area. So Baker is completely distinct from us. We don't have anything governance-wise in common with them, other than we both fall under the PROA. Any other questions on this slide? Okay.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
On Unit 1, on the balconies, if you don't own them, why wouldn't they maintain them?
Because that's what it says in the declaration. It's the guy filed with the county. The county says that it's a limited common element, and it says in there who's responsible for what elements, and the owners who have the exclusive use of that limited common element are responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of that limited common element.
But we're not on parking spaces.
Same, actually, you'd be responsible for that as well, and that's an issue that you probably heard talked about at the board meeting with, for example, EV spots. If the outlet shorts out, for example, and you have an EV spot, it's the owner's responsibility to pay for the cost of that repair. We had another resident, I don't see him here today, who had a leaking gas valve on their balcony, and they had to pay to have somebody come out and fix that. So we are all responsible for the maintenance and repair of those limited common elements. Yeah.
So you have Unit 2, the parking garage, and then underneath our residential association board, we have a parking garage. So what's the relationship between those two?
Sure. So that, again, it comes from the governing documents that we have. And the governing documents say who owns Unit 2. It talks about what they're responsible for. But under the rules and regulations, it says that the residential board makes policies regarding the use of the units, including, and it specifically says the parking garage, to the extent we don't try and come up with a rule that conflicts with something that the master board believes would be within their domain. So the residential board has both the right and the responsibility under those documents to create rules that are consistent with the documents. And as an example, the governing documents say have rules about noise, the rules about smoking, but they're very high level. And so it's up to the residential board to develop the policies, the written policies that will have the greater specificity around exactly how that's going to work. Another question in the back?
So who represents Unit 2 on the master board?
Both of those are represented by an employee of Silver Powder. Emmett, what is Emmett's last name? I should remember. Boyle, thank you.
Yeah.
So if you ever watch one of the Master Association meetings, which you can join by Teams, you'll see Emmett is there, and Emmett has 2 out of the 3 votes. So when something comes up for a vote on the board, it's basically Emmett saying, here's what I think, and that's the answer is. For those of you who have been very frustrated by the fact that we haven't had our parking rules that we came up with implemented for guest parking out front, it's in part because the Master Association thought, well, I don't know if I agree with that. He doesn't live here, not affected by it or influenced by it, but he wasn't sure he liked the plan that we came up with.
But he did finally tow the car that had been out there for 7 months.
All right, that's something.
Oh, well, it's gone. He was out there doing his thing.
Pick up the volume a little.
Okay. All right, so let's go to the next slide before I ask for more questions. So the question that often gets asked is, why do we have 2 associations? I already talked about that previously. It's because the developer decided that's the governance structure they wanted to establish. They wanted to have a master association and then the residential association that would fall underneath that. So it's actually not common. I wondered about that a lot, so I did some research, and that's not the way most condominiums are set up. It's the way that some condominiums are set up. Why this one was set up that way, Sandy's theory is as good as any, because they want to have more of a say over what goes on in the community. That's really the only thing that I could think of that would give any value to being the owner of Unit 1 would be that vote that you have. Otherwise, like I said, they don't live here, they don't benefit from anything that goes on here, and then the fact that they do have contractual right to walk into the building and use this room or other common areas.
So Baker Building does not have a master?
Baker Building does have a master, is that right, Sandy?
All 4 buildings set up the same.
We look just like each other.
Yeah, this whole community, in fact, I was looking at the Baker Building documents just the other day. They're the exact same as ours. I think they wrote Baker Building on one and they typed Rainier Building on the other. Otherwise, all the terms and conditions look the same, which isn't surprising, right? It was one developer. The developer came in with his lawyer and he said, I'm doing 4 buildings, and he said, fine, give me the names and I'll just write it at the top of each of these forms and we'll file it. That's not surprising.
So Richard,
Yes.
the Master Association gain anything financially? Why do they keep doing this? What's their?
It could potentially, what Sandy was saying is there is the larger umbrella association over the entire Point Ruston area, the PROA, and they would have a vote on the PROA to the extent that they have a position with the master for all of those units, they have a greater vote. So just like Emmett shows up and he has 2 out of 3 votes here, if he was representing all of the 4 condominiums, he would have that many votes. However, the voting structure turns out working, the PROA doesn't exist yet. As an operating entity, they exist on paper. But once that's put in place, they would have more influence there as well.
Why is there a PROA to begin with? Why do they need that? What are they gaining from it?
Well, the PRA was set up so that you had some governance and responsibility for the entire community. The city doesn't own the development here. So the streets, for example, that's not Tacoma and Ruston that are responsible for the streets here.
Kind of like private.
Yes, exactly.
Private property. So remember too, the PROA creates the budget and the assessments for each individual entity within its community. So we need to stay strong, and we are strong as a community of condominiums. So legally, it was challenged with a group in Bellevue. Is this governing structure legal? And it is. So currently, prior to a receiver, Cohen was the only 2 votes on PROA. Currently, the receiver is the vote on PROA. As new developers come in, they're looking to, in alignment with us, to create a PROA board. If everyone looks at their master budget, they will see that the PROA assessment that we pay is our largest dollar item on our master budget, which each of us are paying 99.7% of. So your board is looking just consistently at, it's all three levels that implement our building, from what we're allowed to do out in our guest parking, to what's allowed in our landscaping, to what's allowed on windows in terms of guidance and PROA governance of what can occur. So it's a three-level governance structure that your residential boards throughout all 4 communities continue to work together with our owners to protect and serve the interest of each owner who lives in our community.
So is the current status of this building is that when Cohen went into bankruptcy, then this went into receivership, and it still is in receivership, and we're waiting for someone like to buy us?
No, we're waiting for Judge Rumbaugh to make a decision. There were 6 separate receiverships within this community due to foreclosure issues with Mr. Cohen. So those are all legal issues that the courts are dealing with. We own our property. Each community owns their properties, or whoever the owner is, but we're still part of a larger community. Your home's not.
Yeah, but I mean, like Unit 1 and Unit 2, someone owns those.
The declarant.
But you said you hoped that didn't last forever.
Correct.
So they would sell Unit 1 and Unit 2 to somebody else?
Maybe some legal thing during our envelope study. Potentially, we could request a date for turnover. That's totally an open question right now that we can't.
These documents are set up in favor of the declarant.
Sure.
They're not set up in favor of us as owners of this building. And so that's part of what the battle is that everything's set up that favors the declarant. And so we're trying to work with that.
And when you say the declarant, you mean Silver Cloud? Correct.
No.
Well,
No.
Silver Cloud's only the declarant of Baker, Rainier, and they own Silver Cloud. PROA is every spot, including Building 5, all the apartments,
So they're part of the declarant.
everyone. So the declarant was originally just the developer, Mr. Cohen.
Yeah.
From Mike then
But who
to
is it now?
the receiver. It's
So
in
not
court.
Silver Cloud and not.
No, Silver
Okay.
Cloud doesn't even
You
have
just wanted
enough property in the PROA to probably have a seat on the PROA board. It's confusing. Correct. Silver, that's for our building. So Richard moved on to PROA. For our building, the declarant
Yes.
owns Unit 1 and Unit 2, and that's what we got.
We have one question over here.
Could you stand up, because we can't really understand what she's saying. Sure.
Sandy, people are having a hard time hearing you.
Could you stand up so we could all hear you?
I will.
So another question up front.
So when you sell your condo, are you obligated to tell the purchasers that they don't own the deck, they don't own the parking, and they don't own the outside?
I'm not a lawyer, I'm not going to give you legal advice, but I will say when you sell your unit, the buyer will receive the whole package that you receive before you put on an offer on the unit here that includes all of those documents.
Let me include something to your answer there. So when you sell your home, the declarant, it was under Unit 1, as Richard said, the structure of the building. As soon as the declarant sold you your home, your deck and your parking space became a part of Unit 3 as a limited common element specific to your unit that transfers with your, so there's no risk of you losing your deck or your parking space. It's part of Unit 3, and it's a limited common element of Unit 3.
Sure, and that's a good nuanced addition. You don't have to tell them you don't own it. You do have property or usage rights to it that do convey with the self-owner unit.
The declarant has no control over your deck or parking space.
Didn't have questions? Okay. Any other questions? If not, I've already covered what's on this slide, which was talking about Unit 1, that is the building defined by the property line, Unit 2, the parking garage, and Unit 3, which is the residential association, which is defined just as the interior space of all of your units. And then you also have responsibility, as we've been talking about, for certain limited common elements as well. But the residential association is just made up of the owner's units, and your unit is defined as the particle board or paint to paint, as lots of people like to say, basically just the interior, floor to ceiling, wall to wall within the units. So we've talked about a lot of this as well already in the process of talking about some of the way governance works, but the rights and responsibilities of the different associations are spelled out in these documents, in the declarations. You all have copies of them. You can find them on the front steps. I believe we have hard copies in the office that are available.
Yes, we do.
So if you do want to read these documents, they're available in multiple different places. You can also get them with the county. But there are three main documents. It's the declaration, and that's the biggest one, and that has most of the important elements in it. And that's the declaration that established the association, both the residential association and the master association. And it specifies the rights and responsibilities of the association and the powers of the board and how the board is to operate. We also have bylaws, and the bylaws define the role of the association members and of the board. So it drills down a level from the declaration, a little bit more detail about the relative roles and responsibilities of all owners, as well as the board. And there really gets into the details of the board and how the board is elected, requirements, or how long board members serve. It talks about the officer positions. That's where all of that is laid out, is in the bylaws. And then we have rules and regulations, and that's a much lower level document, and as written up here, it's really, rules and regulations are intended to promote a good neighbor policy. So what are the rules and regulations that we all want to live by so that we're all happy that we're living here? And none of us feel like we are having our space interfered with by others, that we have rights and access to the things that we think we should have rights and access to. It's how do we interact with each other. That's mostly what the rules and regulations cover. And we'll get this posted somehow, and there's actually a link that you can go to down here where you can go and find the Washington version as well that gives you all the rules and regulations for code. That specifies how condominiums operate and how condominium boards operate. Yes.
So how do any of those get updated or changed?
Sure. The declaration establishes how the declaration gets changed, and it's different depending on what part. You may remember it was a while ago, I guess it was last year, when changes were made to the declaration regarding litigation and what it took to establish litigation. And that was changed in the declaration upon a vote by all of the association members. Some of the other things like the rules and regulations, those can be changed by board. So the board would have a rule or regulation, vote on it, and then it would become an enforceable rule or regulation. So it depends based on what document you're talking about. Yes?
I think important to your question too is the declarations with the declarations within our building, in every condominium building within the state of Washington is governed by WCOA, which is the Washington Universal Code of
something or the other.
Something. 64.90. So declarations are not up to any single entity. They follow what the state has for protection over each of us who own a condominium. So a couple simple things needed to be done by our legal, Barker Martin, Jeremy Stillwell, to our current declarations. But, so for example, Baker, Copperline, and Century are still acting under RCW 64.34 or .38. By January 1st of 2028, their declarations will need to be amended to align with RUCOA 64.90, which our building is already under.
And I think the very important thing is to change the declarations, I believe, takes an affirmative vote of 80% of the owners. And that takes months to get.
Well, this is important though. So an amendment cannot be made that does not align with the state WCOA guidelines. So we can't amend our declarations outside of the protection that the state provides. So as Richard shared, we do have rules, policies, regulations that are more being kind to each other and caring for our neighbors. And those sorts of things are done by the people in the trust to sit on the board. But declarations are not up to anyone or anything other than WCOA 64.90 effective January 1st of 2028. All condominium associations will need to meet the standards that we live to and have since our building has been built.
So this slide gets into a little bit more of the details around what the different boards are responsible for. So the master board, what are their authorities? They're responsible for the structure, so shelf, roof, windows, exterior walls, the elevators. That was a question earlier, who's responsible for the elevators? That's the master board. The parking garage is under the master. Large capital projects under the master association. There are shared utilities, so we all have the utilities we pay for within our units, but there are shared utilities, electricity in this room, for example. None of us pay for that individually. And then the grounds around the building, they're responsible for the landscaping and the driveways.
As an example of building structure responsibility, over in Baker, they're having some siding work being done currently. Does that fall under the master board over there on the Baker building as an example?
I assume, but I don't know.
Yeah. So the work you see being done at Baker currently was included in their envelope study, which we're currently in the process of. So any structural issues for them, there was some siding issues. The decks all needed to be recoated, and so we're in that process right now.
So is that falling under the building structure master board?
No, the residential.
The residential part.
Yeah, yeah. We will be in mediation very soon, hopefully, with the insurance company that the declarant has, just as Baker did.
Sandy, outside of the envelope study process, which is a special process for the end of the warranty period for the building, if the siding needs to be replaced 5 years from now for a totally different reason, is that the master board?
Yeah, and so again.
So there's a difference right now because of the legal process that we're in.
Yeah, Baker's older, I understand.
Yeah, and they just went through their envelope study and settled it, and now they're doing the work that came out of that envelope.
Yeah, and insurance is paying for that. So for like the siding's probably 20 years out. So again, if you look at your master budget, we have what is called a reserve study with over, I think we're just at about $1.4 million now. So each year we review that reserve study that's done by a third party. It's not done by anyone on the board or such. And those dollars look at RUL and UL. So we're saving money now for replacement. So repair and maintenance is not covered in a reserve study, but replacement, capital issues, that's why we strongly fund our reserve here in this building.
Yeah. The important thing, again, to remember is that even though it might be the master responsible, we pay at the end of the day.
Yeah.
The master is not putting any money on the table for that.
Yeah.
And that's why we have to have the reserve fund, because the master is just going to set us the bill.
Or otherwise, we have a special assessment.
So what is the residential board responsible for? What are the authorities of the residential board? It's much smaller than it is for the master board. They've got most of the bigger issues. We've got interior common areas, so the furnishings, the hallways, cleaning, all of the interior common areas. Maintenance, hallways, stairways, lobby, we're responsible for the maintenance, ongoing maintenance, cleaning and upkeep there. Developing rules and regulations, as we talked about earlier. There is a level of insurance, but it's not the level of insurance that would insure the outside of the building, for example. That would be held by the master. The insurance that the residential board is responsible for is really just insurance that protects the residential board from being sued and any damages that might come out of that or attorney's fees. And then lastly, election of the residential board member to serve on the master board. That's something that the residential board does. You have a question for that?
It's not a question, I just want to make a comment. A lot of our residents have been frustrated with rules and regulations and policies that the board is trying to establish. But I want to tell everyone that what your board is doing is protecting you. For example, we have a rule and regulation about your pets. Your dogs, cats, whatever, cannot be wandering the halls unleashed. The reason for that is not because we don't like an animal. The reason for that is that if an animal were to attack a person or another animal, we, as part of our association, could be liable, financially liable. So what the board is doing, and people are getting very frustrated with, they're trying to come up with rules and regulations to make us flow easier, smoother, but in many respects to also protect each and every one of us and our interest in the building.
Any other questions on this slide before I move on? Okay, I think we talked about all the hard stuff already. The current residential board members shown here, this is the same slide that I went over at the Residential Association Board meeting the other day. You can see the 5 positions as well as the officer position held by each of the board members there. You'll note that we have one open position now, the vice president position. We have the treasurer position. Jane has served her 2 years and is leaving at the 21st of July, I believe, is the last official day.
Thank you.
So actually, we should also I said I was going to get to earlier the importance of participating in the governance of the association. We do have an open position that will be coming open. I just mentioned the treasurer position. Sent out a notification to all association members that we were soliciting nominations for someone to fill that role. We got 0. So all of us in this room are responsible for the governance of this building and making decisions about the governance of this building and representing our interest on the master board. And lots of people have very strong opinions about some parts of that. Some of those get expressed on Facebook, on the Facebook group, some of them at board meetings. It's up to all of us to step up if we don't like what's going on, or if we do like what's going on and we want to see it continue, whatever it is, need to participate in the process. So I just encourage all of you, the board, that nomination process is closed. I cannot speak for the entire board or for Sandy, but I'm sure if somebody raised their hand in the room today and said, hey, I think I'd really like to do that, you would be considered. So it's never too late just because you didn't send in your name. But in all seriousness, governance works when you've got lots of good people contributing. And by lots, the whole community would be great. That's impractical. Getting on a committee is helpful. If you're ever sure you're not going to like a decision that comes out of the board, the best way to get there is to have a board of one person. Great for that one person, because they get blamed for everything. but not good in terms of governance. It's not a way of having lots of good ideas brought to the table, of having debates, of having decisions made that considers a lot of different viewpoints. So that it's a problem we're going to have to figure out how to solve as a community. And I think it's hard. We all have other lives. Many of us in this room, including myself, are retired. We already worked a lot of years, and not sure we want to work a lot more years. But someone has to be on the board. At the end of the day, I actually asked this question not long ago. What happens if there's no one on our board? Well, then those two people on the master board, which is really one person, they'll make every decision. And that's probably not what we want as an association, as a community either. So somehow or the other, we are going to have to figure out how to get people on the board. I will also say, I've talked to some people as a board member myself about it, trying to get people to volunteer for the board. And one of the things I hear back is, it looks like a lot of work. I'll tell you, I think it has been a lot of work. This building is brand new. And they've been establishing the board processes, they've been establishing rules and regulations, there's been litigation ongoing, and ongoing disputes with the developer. People have done a great job and put in a lot of hours to get us to the point that we are now. But my own personal experience from having been on the board for the last few months is, it comes in fits and starts. Most weeks I spend maybe 3 or 4 hours, and it's mostly responding to email. You've got meetings that happen quarterly. I attend the master board meetings. You don't have to if you're a board member, but that's an hour or two a month. It's not a huge time commitment, but it is a time commitment, and you have to take it seriously. And you have to be willing to put in that time to carry out the responsibilities of a board member. But I would encourage all of you in the room and in the other 200 units here to strongly consider it. It's a 2-year commitment, but you're doing something valuable for the entire community. If you want to look at other ways to have influence in the community, and you don't want to get on the board, I listed just a few here. One, you can just be informed and participate in the board processes. So when things are sent out to members to comment on, annually when we review and ratify the budget, those are all things that all of us in the room can look at and provide input to the board on, so the board makes decisions that are considering all of the good input that they can throw from others. You can also work through the residential board as your advocate. So we get that. People raise their hand and say, well, why don't we have whatever it is? I'm not able to think of one off the top of my head. Why doesn't the board do this? Well, one way to get change around here is to raise your hand and say, I'd like to see something done. I can take actually one example. Somebody said, Baker has great recycling. Why don't we have good recycling? We think the board should fix this and have better recycling. Well, your board members don't have all the hours in the day to figure that out either. And so the response was, well, as an interested homeowner, why don't you find out what Baker does and see if you can help put together a proposal. We can figure out as a community whether to do this. Never heard another word. So there are ways you can engage, and there are ways you can have influence, but all of them require some dedication of time. And you have to be willing to, if you've got a great idea, the board isn't the management team. We have a management company, but they also have limited hours. Residents have to be willing to put in the time to help out with some of these things. And then the last one there, you can consider joining a committee or volunteering for any of the special projects. We've had a couple special projects. One, artwork up on the upper floors. Last year it was the floor 1 through 4 with artwork and furniture down there. So there are other ways to become involved in the community other than just joining the board that do help out.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I do think that it's a little bit confusing sometimes if you do want to propose an idea, but maybe the social committee or the architecture committee or the garage committee is already working on that. We don't really know that they're doing that. And so if we launch out on our own, if I said, oh, we need better acoustics in here, so I go and get an acoustical specialist to come in, but maybe somebody else has already done it. We really don't know what's going on with some of those things.
I think that's a fair point, and I experienced that myself before I joined the board. Our committees are not very, very transparent.
They're doing a great job. Don't get me wrong.
They're doing great things, but we don't always know who's on them. We don't know what issues they're working on. And I think that's something that as a community, we could do better on. We can make sure that the board meetings are announced. I think the board meetings could be open as an example. I'm not saying we should run out and do this. I'm just saying to the extent that people want to be involved and that's the way they want to be involved, I don't think we make it very easy there either. And I think that's something that we could work on as a community.
Well, especially with, I just don't want to see a lot of people doing things that are redundant.
Sure.
Wasting time, and then people are going to.
I think the comment I would make is each committee has a chair, and you could probably find that information out on front steps and send an email or find out from Leslie how to contact that person on the committee, and that they can direct you or give you information about what their committee is doing.
Because we don't have the newsletter anymore, right? No. Yeah.
You know, at the Baker Building, I was just in their elevator, they have a piece of paper up on it like ours that talks about the community events going on, but they also list all the board members and their email and all the committees and the heads of the committees. It's right in the elevator, so we could probably find a central location. I don't know if the elevator is the right place, maybe it's down on the bulletin board by the package room, but someplace it would be good to have that information out there.
Great.
Yes, sir.
This isn't necessarily government, but does anyone have any idea why in the recent Pierce County assessment for our property, the land estimation valuation went way up? What does that mean?
I can see that. I remember my property bill this year, it was the same as it was last year for the land. The land was pretty low. The assessment is just
Appraised value of the land portion of our property taxes doubled.
Really?
So the obvious conclusion is our property taxes have also doubled.
That's not
Thank
our property.
goodness for an abatement for at least another.
Well, that's only on the improvement portion, yeah.
Right.
Which is the majority.
Right,
by
which
far.
is the majority.
And you know, the Baker abatement, as they were coming to an end, the same happened.
They had the same thing happen? I'm not surprised.
You don't keep the same.
And their abatement ends next year. We go to 2030.
We said, depends on when you move to.
Anybody else? This is otherwise the last slide. We can talk about anything on prior slides or any other questions or comments.
Did you say you're gonna post these slides?
Yeah, I'm sure I can work with Leslie and get these on front steps somewhere. Okay. Thank you all.